everybody. This is Nanette, and this is my chapter from Good, Chapter 7, Addressing Heterogeneity and Learning Ability and Achievement Progress. And I'm a little nasally sounding, and so I'll try not to sound tired. And this is my second attempt. We'll see if I can make the 15 minutes. So here goes. First of all, in addressing education, period, historically, age has what's determined what grade level a student is in. We have relied on commercial texts and their tests. Our learning has become departmentalized, especially in high school and junior high, but in recent years we've also seen the departmentalization in elementary school. And everybody is expected to move at the same pace, and of course all of our pacing now is designed around state tests, not whether or not we'll really get through what's expected to happen in a year. And everybody is taught at the same time, using the same materials. Teaching has been teacher-centered, and the reality is this is effective for many students, but it does not meet the needs of all students when we teach in this fashion. So, the traditional model continues to work, and it's what we always fall back on regardless of all of the different fads and different types of strategies that are introduced, because it really does meets the needs of most students in a relatively efficient manner. Of course, the drawback is that most students doesn't mean all students, and that when a teacher is working with a small group of kids or is doing something to differentiate what's happening in the classroom, other students are left undone, and there's little time for quality individual instruction. So our goal then is to meet the needs of all kids in our heterogeneous classrooms. And some of the considerations that we have are students with learning disabilities, with physical disabilities, we have language issues, we have cultural differences, we have boys and girls in our class and everything in between. We also have students who come from diverse families, have different home environments, and possibly emotional issues as well. And we have kids who are required to come to school, and they have all different kinds of things they're good at, and things that they're not so good at, and things that they enjoy doing. And this is what we need to deal with in our classrooms every day. So first, we will talk about addressing learning and physical disabilities, and some of those can include emotional disabilities as well. And in the past, we've typically had programs where we group students together, and then we've moved more toward including them in the classroom, and we'll look at both of those strategies. So in the past, we had homogeneous grouping, and this basically took students out of a regular learning environment and put them with other students who had similar needs or similar issues. An advantage to this is that it allows for the instructor to target and really direct instruction, and usually this is somebody who's a specialist in the area of working with students with these particular needs. The groups are smaller, so there's more individualized instruction. However, in the past, these students have then been segregated from a mainstream or normal classroom experience. So then the swing has been to full inclusion, which in the olden days was called mainstream, and we'll look at the difference in those two in just a minute. But at this point in time, students who are identified with having learning issues are still expected to be able to receive all of their instruction in a regular education classroom. They may receive some support from special resource people. They may have a whole day of support with an aid in the room the entire day, and they may be on their own with that student with no additional support. The goal is that the student's school experiences are normal, but the other piece of that is that the teachers must provide accommodations, and they have to design learning experiences that are inclusive for that individual and all the rest of the students who are in that classroom. So the debate continues. There are legal reasons why we must include students with special learning situations in our classrooms. Of course, this means that these students may or are labeled, and as teachers we have a wider range of diversity in our classrooms, so that trying to meet the needs of more and more diverse students is becoming quite challenging. The legal obligations we can't get around, and the very first one was Public Law 142, that was authored in 1975, and that's where we got the phrase the least restrictive environment, and that was determined by having an IEP or an individual education plan for the student. And the goal was that that student should be included in a classroom as much as possible, as long or to that relates to his ability to function in that classroom. It was later renamed the Individuals with Disability Act, and they clarified and extended some of the requirements that would take place. And as it became streamlined over the next few years, the trend was from mainstreaming to inclusion. And what that would mean is that when you mainstreamed, you started with a student who perhaps had been in some kind of an exclusive program or homogeneous program, and then gradually integrated that student into a more normal or more heterogeneous environment. So the goal then switched from mainstreaming to the idea that you start out in that whole group experience in a normal classroom, a regular ed classroom. And then if you need to restrict, you kind of go backwards. And so that's kind of been the shift. Regardless, the goal should be that all students are taught in regular classrooms all the time. And there's been a shift from diagnosing and labeling to first trying to figure out what are the instructional needs of the child and then move from there. So one important person to consider in all of this is the teacher, and part of the debate has to do with teachers who really wonder how can you accommodate all of these multiple special needs, and how is any one person qualified to meet all of those needs? The other question is what really is in the best interest of the student. Not everybody agrees that all students should be in a regular ed classroom. Students who perhaps have physical disabilities, who are blind, who have emotional disabilities, perhaps need to still have some time in a more secluded or narrow-focused environment for part of the day. So there's still a debate about what really is best for the child. And there is now the trend toward implementing classroom interventions first, that before you refer a student, you have to show that you've exhausted all other types of interventions in that classroom before you seek outside help, or perhaps the child is put into something that's a little bit more restrictive. And so our students with identified learning difficulties aren't our only students who are struggling, and probably should also not always include struggling students, because students who are at the other end of the spectrum, who are highly gifted, also fall into the same category of not fitting into, quote, the mainstream, or where average, or what the normal expectation is for students. And so we'll look at some of the strategies and history of working with struggling students. So in the past, students who have not been able to meet the requirements of a particular grade level have been retained or held back, with the thinking that they need to do it again because they didn't get it. The problem is that these students don't become more capable as time moved on. They didn't make those gains because they weren't able to. And so when you hold them back for a second year, they don't necessarily do it then. Sometimes they're able to accomplish it because they've seen it once, but then the following year it's the same story. They're just not able to do the work. So they don't usually catch up, and in time they tend to drop out completely because they're not with their peer groups, they're not successful, and their needs are not being met. Another strategy has been to track or to place students in homogeneous groups. And again, the problem with this is that they can often become labeled and identified early on, and then they don't necessarily ever move out of that track. And research has shown that they often receive lower quality of education, so they're kind of locked in and doomed from the beginning. Yet another strategy that's utilized, and is still utilized today, has been having pull-out programs. And these can be beneficial. However, quite often, students that are pulled out miss out on whatever's going on in the classroom at the time, core instruction, and they may be stigmatized. There's a label attached. Attention is drawn to them because they have to leave the classroom or somebody comes to get them. And so they're seen as in some way special, and it's not always good. So the bottom line is that many of the ways that we have dealt with students with diversities in our classroom have been strategies that are for the most part ineffective and possibly are damaging to our students. So now we can look at what does work. And obviously, individualized programs would be the ideal if every student could learn exactly what he needs to learn at his or her own pace in the way that he wants to or can best learn it. They've found that often just giving students more time, that they can meet the objectives, they just need more time. And that doesn't mean more time in trade-off for something else that they should be doing. It's an addition to what's going on in the classroom, which goes to just giving them additional help, giving them a little bit more support sometimes can be enough. And that one of the most important factors is that they feel accepted and supported from their teachers and their classmates. Mastery learning is what we all go for. We want everybody to master all of the objectives, and the way it's currently done, where everybody has to move at the same rate, everybody is expected to master the same objective at the same time by test-taking time, is really not as effective at doing it a different way. You can have the same objectives, but you need to provide different pacing. Not everybody learns at the same rate. A criticism is that when you slow down, then your faster learners or your GATE students are affected. So the other piece of this equation is that you need to provide opportunities for students who are more capable to have enrichment or to be able to move on while you're still able to provide your slower students with support. You can maximize your opportunities for being successful by focusing on the objectives that are most important to the content. And the biggest problem is that for teachers to make this happen, it requires a huge amount of time and effort related to perhaps the amount of time it takes to teach, or it might be perceived as the payoff. So in order to be more effective, it would be helpful if teachers were somehow provided with ways to provide this instruction that doesn't seem to take a disproportionate amount of time and effort to do it. Now we'll come to differentiated instruction, and we all know what differentiation is, or we've heard about differentiation, and we all are expected to differentiate in our class. And what I really like is that Goode quotes, or came up with, all students need worthwhile activities. Often, for advanced students, differentiated instruction means more work, and for students who are less capable, it can sometimes be less work or letting them get away with not doing what they need to do in order to learn. So what differentiated instruction is can be individualized instruction. You can differentiate in a variety of ways, and that can be through content. They can have different things that they're learning. They can use different reading materials. You can use outside programs, and we'll talk about that in a second. You can differentiate how a student learns. They can work collaboratively by themselves. Perhaps they're visual or auditory learners. You can provide those resources for them. The way that they show you what they've learned. It can be a test, but it could be some kind of a project. Again, it could utilize their strengths in art or creative writing or in presentation. You can also differentiate your learning environment so that you provide students with areas that they can work quietly if they need to be able to concentrate, they can collaborate, they have access to materials, etc. So here's a piece about using programs for differentiation. While they can be helpful and useful, often the research is done by the programs themselves, and of course they tell you they're wonderful. It may be difficult to evaluate how effective they really are with your students, and teachers have found that quite often students can do quite well and get the correct answers, but their skills don't apply to the next level because they misunderstood and they had misconceptions and learned it the wrong way, even though they were able to get the right answer. So those types of programs need to be carefully monitored if they are utilized. So there were some studies done by different researchers, and one that I really liked was this one about junior high school English teachers who had homogeneous classes and then were given heterogeneous classes. And these were some of the things that they found helped when they finally accepted that they needed to adjust for their students' learning. And these, I'm going to move to another slide, was what happened to the teachers who decided just to continue along with whole class learning. And what they found is that they could say, yeah, these kids learn, but they basically didn't hold them to high standards. They didn't really make them learn. They did enough to make it look like they were learning so that they could move on. Some other factors that contribute to school success. Curriculum-based measures, which is kind of like benchmark, and this can be quite time-consuming, but it allows you to focus your construction. There are different principles for differentiation, and the important thing is that you match assignments to student ability and that you prepare your assignments with your students in most need in mind. Differentiation can also include all of these different levels of instruction, and this can be in any grade. Secondary teachers seem to have a harder time with some of the center stuff, but it can be done. And here we've got a map, a couple of maps of a classroom that's got some centers. And here we have an individualized schedule that I thought was fun. And then here are your questions, because now I have to stop recording. Thank you very much for listening. Hope you